Welcome to Bold Agendas, the podcast where we meet with thinkers, leaders, and builders to explore how bold ideas shape the future. Today's guest is someone whose ideas have quietly but profoundly shaped the way we think about innovation, disruption, and organizational scale. Geoffrey Moore is a legendary business strategist and the author of several influential books, including the seminal Crossing the Chasm and Zone to Win, a framework that's helped enterprise leaders tackle one of the hardest questions in business. How do you innovate without disrupting yourself? He's also an advisor to countless executive teams, particularly in the technology sector, who are navigating transformation, platform shifts, and strategic uncertainty. In this conversation, we're not just revisiting his frameworks, we're bringing them into the present. What still holds true? What's evolved? And how should today's leaders think differently about the pace of change, outstripping even our best strategies? I'm Mimi Brooks, your host, and this is Bold Agendas, Zones of Disruption. Geoffrey Moore on leading when the rules keep changing. Let's get started. Jeff, welcome to Bold Agendas. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm thrilled, delighted to have you here.
Well, it's a pleasure for me too. So I'm looking forward to this very much.
I am too. You know, when I heard about you, when my production folks found you, I thought it's such a great time to have this discussion because, the combination of your thought leadership work over a long period of time and your consulting work, it's just perfect now for our clients who are running strategies of really disruptive, difficult change in the organization. I think you've seen it. I know you've done frameworks to try to help people manage through it, and that's what we're going to focus on today, try to get the best of your thought leadership and ideas around strategy and the benefit of the experience of having walked the walk, for as many companies and transformations you've done, because my folks will love the input on that. So thank you so much, and I think it's going to be perfect.
Terrific. I'm honored.
Okay. So, Jeff, I thought that we could start with, and that we have a few of your slides here for those listeners or viewers that have the ability to see it. I'm going to bring them up in just a minute. But I want to spend some time talking about your methodology, the framework that you developed. And I think that when you wrote Zone to Win, which is where the framework can be found, I think that was back in 2015. Am I saying that right, Jeff? Was it 2015?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
2015 that, you put together this way to think about competing, priorities and interests that leaders might find themselves in and how they manage through that. So I want to spend some time talking about that because it seems highly relevant to me today in terms of, applicable to leader challenges. So why don't we start with what drove you to this framework back in 2015 and then, how you think it still has relevance today. And then I'll bring up some slides and you can talk us through it.
Okay, but let's give a little background first. So my work in the 90s in particular was mostly with startups. And it was with the venture community. It was about how do you bring disruptive innovations into a mainstream market. And for a startup, that's the only thing that they have to do. It's not a priority problem, right? They only have one priority.
Yeah.
What happened at the turn of the century was the more established corporations said, hey, wait a minute, we're not going to sit on the sidelines. But when they would try to take on the next disruptive thing, we get into this set of competing priorities between how do I prosecute my existing line of business? How do I represent the interests of my existing shareholders and customers and employees, and at the same time be involved in a highly disruptive engagement. And that frankly created quite a lot of traction problems. So the actual book was written with two executive teams, which was Mark Benioff and his team at Salesforce and Satya Nadella and his team at Microsoft. So these are pretty good teams. And so I call it my framework, but frankly, I'm just stealing from some pretty bright people. But both CEOs were adamant about this is our problem, and we need a framework to do it. So the framework that we're going to share here now, I think you should understand is this is a framework for an established enterprise. You don't have to be Microsoft. You can be a $40 million family-owned company, but your life is based in your current book of business. But it is obvious that something like artificial intelligence is going to change your industry, and you can't be left behind But now you have all these tensions that we're going to talk about.
Perfect. And similarly, right, Jeff, while my folks here load the couple of slides that we're going to share, similarly, a lot of businesses that we work with, I'm sure you as well, find themselves trying to run more than one, executable strategy at the same time based on, the part of the business that they're focused on or the outcomes that they're focused on. So I think this idea of, how to put more than one ball up in the air, at the same time with legacy businesses is a common condition. Yeah.
I think it's going to be the new normal.
Yeah.
Because look, we don't want to keep having to rebuild company over and over again every time a new technology comes along. We have to have our existing institutions find a way to continue to evolve. So this framework, and by the way, it's not that people don't understand the strategy. It's not that people don't get it. They get it. The problem is the actual tension of executing it.
That's right.
So this is an execution framework. And basically what it says is, look, you've got a bunch of stuff for your current business. We call it sustaining innovation. It's still innovation. You're still doing a lot of new things, but it's basically in the context of your inertial momentum is in favor of doing these things. And so it kind of works together. On the other side of the diagram is disruptive innovations where inertia is not your friend. You're actually going against what you would normally want to do. And as a result, everybody hesitates, expectations. You don't quite get the benefit of the doubt the way you would with your current business, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of the problem statement. And then we divided it up into things that are mission critical, meaning at this stage in the transformation or the activity, failure really is not an option. And then there's things where you have time to sort of experiment and work behind the scenes. So it's a 2x2 matrix for those of you who are just listening. Most consultants are in love with 2x2 matrix, and I'm one of them. So basically, let me kind of walk you through the zones, and I'll kind of walk you through. If you're looking at a clock, I'll start at 1 o'clock and go all the way around that way. So in the upper right-hand quadrant, it's called the performance zone, and that's where you deliver all the value in your current business. It's where you make what you sell and sell what you make, and basically, it's how you give value to the world today. So really, in a sense, the performance zone is where you're all about. It's what the world knows you as. And eventually, whatever you're doing in the other three zones has to show up eventually in the performance zone, because that's how you give value to the world. So the performance zone, really, we're very good at managing the performance zone. We use a lot of financial metrics for it. We have strategies. It's great. There's a zone right below it, in the lower right-hand quadrant, called the productivity zone. That's all the cost centers that are in shared services that make the performance zone operate at scale. You probably have twice as many resources in the productivity zone as you do in the performance zone, because that's what it takes to run a global enterprise. And together, those two zones are 90% of your budget. I mean, this is your business, right? This is it. The productivity zone's responsibilities is to manage processes and to make haste slowly, to make sure that things operate correctly, keep you out of jail, keep your accountants, your SOC, all that kind of good stuff, compliance, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the two zones, and those zones you've had in your business forever. Now, you want to do something disruptive. Neither of those zones is a good place to try to do anything disruptive. The performance zone is mission critical. You really do have to make your numbers, and the productivity zone is designed to work with processes. It's designed to eliminate disruption, not create disruption. So the third zone in the lower left-hand quadrant is called the incubation zone. And that's where what you ideally would have it be like one of those Y Combinator startup things where you can run these little experiments. You want to run them as if they were economic experiments, though. This is not in the 20th century. This was the corporate lab. This was IBM Labs. It was right. Xerox PARC. The lab model didn't work because it didn't get into the market deep enough to make things happen. But the startup model, as we know from the venture community, does work. So you kind of run a sort of a startup zone in the incubation zone. And they play by their own rules. There's a whole set of operating model there. We'll talk about it in a second. And then the final zone is not normally active. It's called the transformation zone. And that's when you say, I am going to take a disruptive innovation and I'm going to put my entire company behind bringing it into my performance zone. I'm going to change my profile. I'm going to change my portfolio. And it's highly disruptive. And it makes all the other three zones really challenged. And so that's the zone, we call it the big bets zone, where the trial balloons in the incubation zone becomes the big bet. So those are the four zones. So let me if I put up two more slides, I think it will kind of just clarify it, and then we'll talk through it a bit. So in this second slide, it's about each of these zones has a different culture. And I know we like to say we have one culture at our company, and you should. You should have one set of values, etc. But if you go into the zone, the performance zone is a think fast zone. You're competing to win. You're playing against other competitors. You keep score by quarter. It's just like the Super Bowl, quarter by quarter. And you have an annual score, and you report it out to investors if you're a public company. So that's the place where you're doing your current work, and you want people that are competitive and kind of want to make the number, achieve the goal, do. The productivity zone, on the other hand, is where you want to think slow. Now, this is Daniel Kahneman's book called Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yes.
But this is where you use data to do the analytics. You take the extra time to research things. Often in the performance zone, there's no time to research things. But in the productivity zone, there is. You want to take things to scale. You want more analytical people in the productivity zone, more kind of do-it-now intuitive people in the performance zone. Again, some people can play in both zones. But there's different cultures, and those cultures aren't completely, they kind of tease each other because each one of them looks at the other one going, I don't know if you're as good as you think you are. So those are those two zones. The incubation zone has to have a startup-oriented, we call it think different. Well, Steve Jobs called it think different. And that's where you would invent to figure out, is this something that we should be doing? In the incubation zone, you don't know. In other words, failure in the incubation zone, it's the only zone where failure actually can be a good thing. Because failure means, you know what, this is not part of our future portfolio. Good, let's ignore it now. We can do that. We've tested it. We can go forward. But if it is something that's part of our portfolio, now how are we going to take it to scale? Sometimes you can kind of just slide it into the performance zone. You don't always have to do a transformation. Sometimes the existing businesses can say, if you've taken it this far, we think we can take it the rest of the way ourselves. So thank you very much. But sometimes it's like, no, this is a new channel. It's a new customer base. It may even cannibalize some of our existing businesses. And that's where you get to the transformation zone. And there the culture's got to be just once you start, and this is the number one lesson of the whole thing. And Benioff and Satya did this brilliantly. If you enter the transformation zone, everyone has to be rowing in the same direction. If you're not rowing in the same direction, we're going to kick you off the boat. And we're not going to quit this transformation until we're all the way into the performance zone, no matter what. So it's a huge CEO commitment. And when we talk about the challenges of being a CEO, this is the challenge zone. Because nobody else, the transformation zone has to look at everybody in the company and say, you have to make a sacrifice based on what I just said. Well, the only person who has the authority to do that is the CEO. So that's where it comes from. And so just the last slide to kind of bring this to home a little bit more concretely is because we measure our successes, each zone has different metrics. And this is where the teams at Microsoft and Salesforce were getting tangled up because they were bringing metrics of one zone to evaluate something was happening in another zone.
I can see that. Yep.
Yeah, can you see it? So in the performance zone, it's all about bookings versus plan, revenue versus plan, contribution margins. It's a terrific set of metrics. It's no good for any other zone. It's just for that zone. In the productivity zone, process improvement ratios, program objectives met, compliance standards met. Again, critical metric for that zone, but neither of those metrics, and this is weird, apply to either one of the other two zones. You say, well, wait a minute. Of course it does. Bookings, you have to book things in the incubation zone. And the answer is, yes, you do. But it's not about booking. It's about power. It's not about performance. In the incubation zone, you're trying to figure out, does this baby have a future? Right? So you're interested in its future potential, not in its existing returns.
Right.
And so and this is where they were getting screwed up. Because what would happen is they'd start things in the incubation zone. They look very promising. They get some early return. But then all of a sudden, they were starting to demand more and more resources. And frankly, they were having negative returns, not positive returns. And so at that point, the performance zone and the productivity zone, people are going, well, wait a minute, you're not playing by the right rules. And so they would minimize or marginalize or hedge or postpone. And basically, in the incubation zone or the transformation zone, if you ever take your foot off the gas, don't bother to put it back on. It's over. So in other words, and by the way, in the incubation zone, you frequently take your foot off the gas and should.
Yes.
But in the transformation zone, you must not.
Right.
And so the last one, the transformation zone or the incubation zone, it's the classic venture metrics. Product market fit, marquee reference customers, repeatable use cases. Did you cross the chasm, to refer to an earlier book that I wrote? Those are the key metrics for the incubation zone. And if you're going to take it to real scale, in the transformation zone, the metrics are how fast can you adopt, Did you get to the tipping point? In other words, did you get to the point where inertia, who has been your enemy, has now become your friend? And that's what the tipping point's all about. And the investors will recognize that if you're a public company, you'll see, as you saw the stock of Apple or Microsoft or Nvidia or any of these people, it goes through the roof if they really think you've crushed it. So anyway, and the final statement I'll just say is the key takeaway from this, because in business school you learn that what gets measured gets managed, and the unfortunate corollary to that is what gets mismeasured gets mismanaged.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of mismeasurement that causes grief. So that's it.
That makes perfect. I love this, Jeff. It makes perfect sense to me. If I can just play some common scenarios then into this model, and see what you think. So, one scenario to me that I see I see it way too frequently is this idea of the CEO taking their foot off the gas in transformation. Something happens that spooks them, Jeff. They get spooked. And it usually comes from the performance zone, so they're crossing these zones in terms of, current marketplace pressure or operational excellence in the current state, while they're, putting their foot on the gas in transformation. And if they hit a headwind on the performance side, it can cause them to pull their foot off the gas on the transformation side. Do you see what I'm talking about as a common scenario?
I think that is the number one source of transformation failure, and I see it everywhere. And the reason why, and I'll be the performance zone guy talking to the CEO. Well, do you want me to work on your project, or do you want me to make my number?
Yes.
And of course, do you want? By the way, it's a really tough question. But the correct answer to that question is, if we are in a transformation, the transformation takes priority over making this quarter's number, or even, frankly, this year's number, which is a terrifying thing for a CEO to say.
Yes.
Terrifying. But the point is, when she says, well, why is that true? Well, first of all, if you're taking venture risk in a transformation, but the purpose of venture risk is to create extraordinary valuation at the other end of the tunnel. So the transformational initiative has to be able to say, if this transformation is successful, and I'll make you a public company for the moment, our stock price might double. Okay, I mean, the way Apple did when it got the iPad or got the iPhone or got the iPod or whatever it was. So that's number one. Number two is, when we started transformation, we put their entire ecosystem on notice that we are doing something dramatic. If we don't complete that action, if we halfway through pull back, we're teaching our ecosystem and our partners and our customers that we're kind of a part of the last generation. We're not going to be part of the next generation.
Yeah. Which
means you are now, and we've seen this with dozens and dozens of companies. It's not that your company goes away. There is no more chance that you do not have a future of success. Yeah. You have a future of gradual, slow decline, and that can take a couple of decades. But you're not going up anymore.
Right. It's the same road, though, whether you're descending fast or slow, it's the same road, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I see that all the time. I find it so interesting that you think that scenario is the most common. That really makes sense to me. What about this one, Jeff? The leadership team said they were aligned and they really weren't aligned, and it could be that they really didn't understand what the transformation meant. They thought it was more of an optimization of the current state, an improvement of the current performance zone. I'll use your language, versus true transformation. And so they got into something, and the only way they could think of getting out of it was to say that it wasn't working. It's not me. Sure. It's not that I wasn't ready. It's not that I didn't understand. So go ahead. Yeah.
This is really, and this is where the CEO has to align the team. And frankly, if the team can't align, they have to get kicked off the boat.
Yeah.
So in every major transformation I've seen, been around, several highly competent, super successul executives have had to be asked to leave. And what the reason is because they're so locked into their zone. So if you're a real good performance zone leader, you just can't imagine asking somebody to say, I want you to, throw the game. Basically, we're going to take out all our best players and put in a bunch of brand new players. And the guys go, you're going to lose the game. And the answer is, well, we might lose that game, but we're going to win a longer game. So that's a performance zone, guys. So they're locked into, you can't do this to me. The productivity zone guys get locked into a different problem, which is we haven't studied this enough. There's too much risk involved in this. We should go much more slowly. You're going too fast. Let's move incrementally. And again, for the productivity zone, that's exactly how you want a productivity zone person to think.
Yes.
But you can't let either of those leaders hold you hostage, which is what happens all the time.
Happens all the time.
A powerful leader, yeah. It's either the CRO or the CFO.
Yeah.
It's either the chief revenue officer or the chief financial officer, and you see this in companies where they actually have more power than the CEO. They hold the entire team hostage, and they're not being malicious.
Right.
They're trying to be their best self.
Right.
But
exactly.
It doesn't work.
I think that scenario creates tremendous dysfunction, Jeff. In addition to playing against your long-term plan here and strategy, it creates tremendous dysfunction on the leadership team.
Yeah. And this is where, by the way, the CEO's job at that point is to fire that person.
Yeah.
Even though they're the best. I mean, you see this in sports occasionally. The very best player on the team is actually holding the team's success hostage. And because of their own particular ego or whatever, you see it in sports frequently. So and if you take the person off the team, well, immediately their performance goes down because this is their best player. But over time, the team performance actually gets better because they play better as a team.
You have to have a stomach for this, right? I mean, from a CEO perspective, you've just got to have a stomach for it.
And most CEOs are much better at kind of managing a coalition of the willing. And look, there's a lot of ego in business. So it's not like these people are a choir. These people are a bunch of rock stars all thinking they should be on stage at the same time. So the CEO's got they've got some work to do. But the CEO has to have the courage. And this is what I think Benioff and Satya are particularly good examples of. And there's many others who say, look, we're going to have the courage of our conviction. And they're good at recruiting people they're good at inspiring people to give up their local rights in favor of the global rights, because you have to be inspired to do it.
Totally.
And they are inspirational.
Totally. Yeah. I just have to get this one on the table because I'm so interested in your perspective on it. What about this scenario where the CIO is overreaching? In other words, so you've got a CIO that in the past has run transformation-driven strategies. So now we come into today's version of it, where really we're talking about disruption of the business model and the business operating model way before we're talking about disruption of the tech. But if I have a very strong CIO, think financial services, for example, where they wield tremendous weight, but my background and history is in much more back office IT than front office. You know what I mean? Front office architecture, front office, totally. Tech. So, how have you seen that play out when it comes to transformation?
Yeah, it's important. And in fact, it's almost you would have like two CIOs. Because look, you're going to want somebody to run your back office
right
before, during, and after this thing. But that person is a productivity zone culture person. I would hope they are. There is an incubation zone culture person who probably would be, I'd probably call them a CTO. I don't want to call them the CIO because I don't want to put the whole thing in charge of them. And the challenge you have there is frequently they come from a startup. So the good news is, if coming from a startup, they understand incubation zone playbook. They're really good at that. What they don't appreciate is how to negotiate and incubate and the adoption of an incubation inside an existing company. They understand this is crossing the chasm versus zone to win. In crossing the chasm, you wanted to beat the crap out of every competitor you could see. You weren't trying to collaborate with anybody. You were just trying to take your innovation to scale. But inside the company, you live in an ecosystem, and you're now part of a family or something, and you have to behave. And that's where they get arrogant. The incubation zone often thinks it's smarter and, frankly, it's
played by a different set of rules, literally, like,
we break things, we make things happen.
Yeah.
And so they're very cocky, and you kind of want them to be cocky.
Yeah.
But at some point you got to say, okay, guys, this is now transformation time, and we all have to play in a very disciplined way, and there can't be any fooling around.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to say it like this. You tell me, Jeff, whether you think this aligns to what you're saying. This idea of the CTO, we use that language all the time to try to show a separation, of what's needed here relative to technology leadership. But the CTO, at the end of the day, they are building tomorrow's enterprise scale.
Yep.
Like that's what it is. That's why it's a horizontal. That's why it's the ecosystem at large, and you've got the really dicey, it's so dicey, the dicey job of figuring out the roadmap from here to there, where the business has got to be able to live and thrive to a certain degree in the transitional states. I find that one of the hardest things to do because you have to say we have to live here and then we have to live there and then we have to live here.
And that's why the zones don't solve the problem. What the zones do, I think, is they put a spotlight on the problem, which is helpful. So, in other words, oh, okay, I see why this is so hard. That's job one. But now job two is, now what do I do? And I think one of the things that you do see is you may end up changing your IT vendor portfolio because your typical IT vendors are going to maybe in legacy mode, and if you're in it has to do with how fast is the technology going to disrupt your industry.
Right.
If you think there's enough time, look, your legacy vendors also want to get on the new bus, but they have the zone to win problem too. And a lot of them aren't going to succeed. Zone to win, unfortunately, does not. I mean, the problem with the zone that zone's taking on, there's a lot of failure in that problem. Even no matter, I don't care how many frameworks you have, it's
hard.
Not everybody gets that.
It's hard. It's hard
it
thinking.
Hard, exactly.
As you said, if it sat in the strategy space, we wouldn't be talking about this problem. It's an execution problem. It is a big E execution problem. And that's where you don't have people that have the experience that we're talking about in doing that flip, that transition.
And it's not just your people. It's the ecosystem of vendors that support your company.
Exactly.
So and by the way, it's your board of directors. There'll be members of your board of directors who think, no, I know. So this is where charismatic CEOs, and we're going to talk a little bit about CEO experience. Maybe it's a good time for us to switch because it is so important that the CEO be able to capture the imagination and the aspirations of all their constituents to get them to make the local sacrifices to get through these changes. By the way, I think a transformation once a decade is plenty. I mean, please don't think you're supposed to be transforming every year. Consultants talk about transformation like it's a butterfly, like it was a caterpillar and it's becoming a butterfly. Well, halfway through, it's just goo inside of a cocoon. It's horrible. Every day in the transformation zone, I say, is a bad day.
Yeah.
So you don't want to do it very often, but when you do it, then the main thing is get all the way to butterfly. Don't open the cocoon halfway.
Jeff, I want to go on to the discussion about how does the leadership team need to behave differently, not just the CEO, but the leadership team, because I just think that the dynamics of the leadership team, collaboration, what are they collaborating on? How are they collaborating on it? And how do our organizational structures really become like an anti-pattern? How you really have to look beyond those structures and responsibility stacks, if you will, that create the verticals in the organization. So, I think lots of discussion there in terms of governance, et cetera. So, I feel like, I had a question I wanted to use as a transformation, though. Oh, it was an important one. And I forgot it. I'll come back to it. I'm sure I'll think about it.
Mimi, at my age, forgetting is one of my stronger suits.
Totally with you. Oh, I know what it was. Here's what I wanted to comment on. Something I thought you said was hugely important. The issue of you might have to pick different partners. I think this is critical, Jeff, as you think about, you're building a new organizational enterprise ecosystem. Of course, that ecosystem has porous walls, in and outside the business. So we're not talking about an insular ecosystem. We're talking about an extended ecosystem. And the idea that what we've seen is that there's very important time that needs to be spent making sure that your partners understand your vision. You've got to be able to explain it, Jeff, and ask the right questions. It's critical to ask the right questions of them so that you know that you have a team that understand what you're talking about. And that they are really ready to run the game plan that you need them to run. Because I think if you ask the right questions, you'd find a lot of readiness gaps there.
You would. And part of it is, it's if you're as a leader, when you talk about your own organization internally, it tends to create a lot of spinning wheels. So one of the things I think that I like about leadership is if people generally use their customer, their target industry customer as their North Star. And the leader starts with saying, look, it's not about us. It's about our customer. Now, what's happening in our customer's world? Can we stay the same and still serve our customers? So if the answer is yes, we're going to stay the same and we're going to serve our customers. But at some point you come along and you go, you know what? We're losing our power to serve our customers. Not because we've changed, but their world has changed. And so therefore, the reason we're changing our team, the reason we're changing our ecosystem isn't because I'm disloyal or I don't like
Yes.
you or I think you've underperformed. You've performed very well. Thank you. But the performance metrics or vectors have changed. And by the way, in this new performance vector, none of us knows how to play this game. I mean, I'll give you an example of Salesforce. Periodically, Mark would bring in a leadership team that was like from outer space because I remember when they brought in Keith Block and his team from Oracle. Salesforce had never really crushed enterprise sales. They'd crushed what they called commercial, but enterprise was always a little bit okay. Well, they brought in the Oracle team and they crushed that, okay? Then they thought, well, but then they realized with the new technology innovation stuff, we need a more technical team. So that was another switch. It was no longer, we were in the enterprise, but now we got to be in the artificial intelligence world. So you watch these things happen and you go, as long as you stay in service to your customers and try to be alert as to the vectors of change in their world, I think you can, this thing about aligning people and getting people aligned, people won't align around you, but they will align around being in service to the mission. And if you show them the mission has to change, they'll, and then you can ask them, is that a mission you want to be on? Because if you want to be on that mission, we have to change.
It's amazing to me, right, Jeff? It's really amazing how totally useful that idea is, customer centricity as a decision-making paradigm. It's kind of amazing that it's as reliable as it is, right? In terms of, gauging.
Part of it is because the customer is a perpetually moving target.
Yeah.
So if you say, how do you adapt to change? If you try to adapt yourself, it's a little bit like if you look inside yourself and say, should I be changing introspectively? You get lost in the funhouse. But if you're just looking out and watching that world saying, oh my God, I can see where they're going. We can't let that. And it gets everybody, instead of looking at each other,
Yes.
you try to get everybody looking outward.
Exactly. And then the dialogue can go from there too, right, Jeff? If you see our customers need differently, get it on the table. Then let's talk about it. So if we need to talk about paradigm differences or perspective differences, those are great discussions. Those are great discussions to happen so that we all think we're looking at the same North Star for the same reason, let the, shoes fall where they fall then. So I love that. So Jeff, let's go to the C-suite and talk about this idea of, so what does all of this mean in the transformation context to new ways of working for the leadership team? Like, what do you think that they need to do? And what do you think that they don't do that causes, the problems most commonly?
Well, a little bit, if I have a hammer, you're going to be a nail, because I do think the first thing I want them to do is zone their enterprise. I just want them to say, guys, so just sit down with each other and agree on which zone you're playing in, because every zone has a different playbook. Now, if you're really, really senior, you may have more than one zone that you're involved with, but most of the people in the company should not. And so just let's do the zoning. And then, because the next thing I want to say is honor the zone. So what I see is people gravitate to a zone. That's their zone. That's the zone they love. And they don't deprecate the other zones. But at the end of the day, they're very single zone centric. And I think if you're part of a leadership team, that's not okay. You have to be the best representative of your zone you can be, but you have to honor the other three zones. And you cannot have the kind of language that disrespects the other three zones. You don't want to teach your team that at all. So that's that. I think those are the two ones that come to mind very quickly.
So what do you think happens, or how does a smaller company deal with this if they can't get clean lines across the zones relative to resources, just for capacity
Then
reasons?
you're asking now a lot more of the human being, but I do. Then I think one way I might start it is with budget. So if you just put out your budget, you said, look, we're going to take all the money we spent last year, and we're just going to do it the best we can to say how much did we spend in each zone. And so, okay, but then you have a number, okay? And I would say a typical number might be 35% in the performance zone, 45 to 50% in the productivity zone, maybe even 60, 5 to 10 somewhere either in incubation or transformation.
Okay.
And unless you're undergoing a deep transformational change, it's probably something like that. And then the next question you would say is, because again, and it's just Harry, Mary, and Sherry. We don't have cast of thousands. It's a smaller company, right? But then the question is, do we, in the interest of our customer, is this the most optimal allocation of resources, given that we're going to serve our customer for the next 2 or 3 years? Are we underinvested, or where are we overinvested? Where are we underinvested? And I would try to, and then that would move headcount. I mean, yeah, at some point it would move headcount. But if you ask yourself, because all strategy really is the allocation of resources in an asymmetrical way. You're just asymmetrically allocating resources in order to be powerful. So are we allocating our resources in a way that makes us as powerful as possible? The people that get in trouble are the ones who say, I'm trying to get the biggest return for my resources this year. So that's kind of like a value-based shareholder. I just want the value now.
Right.
And that's fine, but that's now you're really swimming upstream when it comes to change.
Exactly. So Jeff, if I extracted then some of the key ideas for the new leadership playbook, what would you say would be these, characteristics that are most important?
Well, the good leaders that I see, I was thinking about good leaders and what makes good leaders and bad leaders. One of the wonderful things about good leaders is they listen. I mean, they really do listen, and they listen with humility, and they listen with curiosity, and particularly around underperforming or failing situations, where a bad leader finally tends to get angry or tends to get maybe even blaming or just frustrated. Good leaders don't. Good leaders, this is like Thomas Edison saying there's no such thing as a failed experiment. You just learn something new. Well, they really do. I mean, they really do. And they want to learn. So I think that's kind of number one. And then when you do that, and then after you kind of parse the situation, because it takes time to get people to let go of their defenses enough to actually see what did cause the failure. And failures are always systemic. I mean, yes, there's the occasional idiot, but mostly it's systemic, right? And so then you say, okay, now remember, we're in service to our customers and we're letting them down. So how would we re-engineer this to be successful in the future? And by the way, what kind of a person do we think would be the best leader for this new initiative? And by the way, looking around the table, it may not be any of us.
Yeah.
Okay. And
yeah.
But if you're saying I'm in service, but we are united in being in service to our customers, so we need to add a member to the team. Like the San Francisco Giants just had to add a home run guy. They had great pitching, but no home run guy. Okay, we needed to bring in a home run guy.
Same idea. Very emotional.
Mr. Posey understands everything. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Exactly. So, Jeff, if I juxtaposed this idea of changing C-suite, requirements or needs, if you will, to your consulting work and the times that you might be brought in. So if you walk into a situation where somebody is suspecting that the CEO, let's say, is suspecting that the business is not swallowing this strategy to execution approach in a good way, what are you looking for first? As you're scanning, the business, what are you looking for to try to understand what you're dealing with?
Yeah. So basically, most of my engagements are with the C-suite, at least at the beginning. So I do a lot of interviews at the beginning, and God bless Riverside, Zoom, Teams, Google Hangouts, because I can do this now really, really easily. But you talk to the top 10 people, and then you try to talk to maybe 10 people who are like at least one level down or kind of more in the trenches as to what's going on. And the truth is, they tell you. I mean, honest to God, they tell you.
Yeah.
And so then you go, oh, okay. And then you have to figure out, okay, so we're kind of hung up here, and here. And then this is why I think the job of a consultant is really important, is to sort of step back and think, so how would you untangle this web? And that's kind of that's kind of what an advisor is supposed to be able to do. And then you come back and you come up with a point of view or strategy or a set of ideas. Then I have to take it back to the CEO, and who's almost always the executive. Not in every, pretty close now. Almost every account is the CEO. But the point is, you do a senior executive sponsor say, look, I've been talking to people. Here's what I think the layout is. Here's what I think the problem statement is. Here's kind of how I think you can get at it. This is something that you would like to sponsor and do. And you have to sort of, sometimes you get somebody and you realize, well, he or she said yes, but their body language said no. And as a consultant, you have to learn how to be able to say, you know what, I have to find some way to sort of, we have to, this is not going to work. Because if the sponsor is not genuinely behind the change initiative, everybody knows.
Right.
Everybody knows.
Exactly.
And so it just doesn't work. It doesn't work.
You've experienced that, Jeff, like you've experienced, working with C-suite. And so how has that played out, in a practical sense? Do you address it and see if there's a path to get the CEO comfortable? Do you walk backwards out of the room? I mean, how do you deal with that?
Or I get fired.
Or you get fired?
My job really, to be fair, my job, and God bless, I'm at an age now where I have a little more independence, because it was a lot harder when I was like, if I lost a client, it was like, oh my God, I lost a client. Yeah. But you speak truth to power, and basically you kind of, and I will say, look, I don't think you're as behind this as you need to be, and I think the last thing you want to do is to start a transformation and quit. And so I spend a lot of time people saying, and by the way, sometimes the leader wants to do it, but maybe their board doesn't want to do it. Or maybe the leader's being held. I've been in more than one company where the CFO held the CEO hostage to basically an earnings narrative.
Yeah.
And that they just couldn't get, the CEO could not. And basically, the correct answer is you have to fire the CFO.
Yeah, yeah.
But the board might want to say, no, we have to fire the CEO. And so in those situations, and by the way, it creates, as I said, it doesn't create, you can still create a viable company. It's just not a growth company.
Right.
It can't be a growth company.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because we were involved in an engagement not too long ago where that's exactly what happened. It was a PE-backed organization, and the obstacle, was really the CFO, and the CEO was new, and over time the board backed the CFO, I think, out of past behavior patterns, and and leaves everybody.
And by the way, if
water.
you have a board that is, think about. So look at the comp. So this is another thing about CEOs that they probably don't realize how important it is for them. Well, maybe many do. The CEO is typically the chairman of the board.
Yeah.
And working with the independent director, you have to make sure you zone your board. So a lot of boards are way overly weighted to the productivity zone. I mean, like most of the people on the board are productivity zone people. And I just noticed, for example, Salesforce just added 2 new people to their board. They're both from the incubation zone. I mean, board members from the incubation zone is weird, but they just added 2. They added Amy Chang, who's this incredible data scientist, and I forget the other person's name. But the point is, you have to think about your and in a PE firm, if you're PE backed, it may be that you're an indentured servant to a particular agenda.
Yeah.
And so okay.
Yeah. Have you?
But that's an important thing, Mimi. So this happens all the time. The leader says, "Am I in service to my customer, or am I in service to my investors?" And there's only one right answer.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say that before. Key issue. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Jeff, I want to transition us in the little bit of time that we have left to your more recent book and maybe some interest you have here, and I'll introduce that in just a sec. But before I move us, is there anything else that you wanted to get on the table in our discussion on C-suite, or any of your experience there that I didn't get to?
I think the last thing we said, I might want to just reiterate slightly, because I think it's really important, if you have to do true north as a C-suite executive, the correct answer and the only correct answer is customers first, employees second, investors third. You cannot put them in any other order. And yet what happens, because we want to manage for shareholder value, because the board of directors, et cetera, I've been in cultures where they put the investors first. I've also been in cultures where they put the employees first.
Yes.
And no, not okay. And so that's the last thing.
No, I love that. Matter of fact, I do this kind of wrap up question at the end. Is there any final advice? I think that should be yours. So I think you
okay, I got it. It will be.
got in front of it. Real quickly before I leave, have you ever gotten hired to zone a board? Jeff, have you done that before, or are you just observing that maybe that concept is needed?
What people have often asked me to do is give the zone speech to a board. Now which is not zoning the board, but it is making the board zone aware.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I think to some degree that the board starts self zoning a bit, but I think it makes them go, oh, okay, because the board ultimately is the keeper of the metrics. And I mean, it's the CFO has the data, but the board's the one, the evaluator of the metrics, and you just want to make sure, are we evaluating the right metrics to make us the most successful company we can be?
Makes sense. That makes sense. I actually think that concept would be useful in a lot of the companies that we've worked with. I really think that, the impediment that the CEO just doesn't seem to be able to get over often is the board not in alignment. If they're running the right strategy to execution, the board nodding because it sounds like it's a growth-oriented strategy, which of course they all want. So they want the growth strategy. They just don't want the disruption of the growth strategy.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And here we go.
I want to be I want $1 billion. I just don't want to have to earn it.
Exactly. I just don't want to have to do, dangerous things.
No, exactly. Can I just be a billionaire? Isn't that okay?
Right. Exactly. That's actually a good way to say it. So, in 2021, you wrote, I think, a very interesting and maybe unexpected, book from somebody that doesn't know you well, but doesn't seem like the necessarily most logical, path to follow. And it's called The Infinite Staircase. And it's a much different book than the business methodology framework books that you've done before. So why don't you explain the book in terms of what you were trying to do there?
Well, it's a philosophy book. And maybe for folks who don't have any sense of my history, I started as an English professor with a PhD in medieval and Renaissance English literature. So basically, there was a sort of philosophy orientation early on in my career, went into business. And the wonderful thing about the business thing was my career has always been around framework. And so the frameworks of the technology adoption life cycle and now the frameworks of Zone to Win and a bunch of other frameworks. So the Infinite Staircase is a framework, and it's a strategy framework for figuring out strategy for living on Earth. So it's a sort of a bigger topic. And the idea
a framework nonetheless. That's interesting.
It's another framework.
Yep.
And basically, it was the question it was trying to answer was, in a world where we now have all this incredibly extraordinary scientific understanding of how the universe came into being. Not just the evolution of life on Earth, but the whole Big Bang and everything that happened. But I'm a very ethical person, and all my ethics have come from traditional religion. And so the idea was, well, could you ground traditional ethics in this more scientific, where there's no God? In the secular model, it would all just self-organize. Really? Yes. And it's an extraordinary story. So the first part of the 2/3 of the book are, what is the secular story of creation? How does that work? And it basically works in levels. So you start with physics, and you get chemistry, and you get biology. You go through human development. You get to language, and you get to culture. I mean, there's a bunch of stairs. And it's kind of fun. But when you get to the end, and each stair emerges from the prior stair. So this idea of emergence, which is a really kind of magical idea that out of spontaneously order appears. And you think that's not possible. And the answer is, well, actually, it is possible, and it happens all the time, but you need to understand it. So that's the 2/3. And basically that story's been around for a while, but it's been in pieces. So I wanted to just sort of put it all in one place. So that was good. Then the last third was like, okay, So how do you act as an ethical human being if there's no God that you're supposed to obey? Why are there ethics, and how does that work? And that was the last third. And I think it was a legacy book. It's like, at some point you're saying, look, I'm not going to be on the planet forever. I'd like to write down what I think I figured out and share it. And so that's where it came from.
I love that. I really do. Who encouraged you to write that, Jeff? Did anyone, really encourage you to get this on paper, or was it really just you?
I actually wrote it for myself. It was one of those things about, could I really, because I kind of, all these ideas kind of bubbling around in my head. And I thought, could I really get it down or not? And I probably will die with a pen in my hand. I mean, I blah, blah, blah. If I'm not talking, I'm probably writing. So, that's probably, so that was where it came from.
So, do you think, besides, just being the work in its own right that it is, did you have any thoughts of the application of this, or the potentially value of it, for business leaders as part of a, 360 way of thinking about their leadership?
Here, I made a marketing mistake here, because I thought, no, Jeff, this is completely different. Don't put this on LinkedIn, blah, blah, blah. But then, of course, the book was published and it had sold very, very few copies. So the idea was, okay, well, maybe I'm going to put this on LinkedIn. What is interesting is there is an intersection. It's a Venn diagram, and I don't know how much of the Venn diagram it is, but there are people who who really like both sets of frameworks. And it tends to be people who are saying, look, and this is happening in business. Business, I think, is becoming more mission driven.
Yes.
In our era.
Yes.
And so the notion that you would incorporate, ethical values or metaphysical ideas into your business model isn't crazy. And in fact, for a bunch of people, it's central. And by the way, I would argue that, again, of the CEOs that I've dealt with in the last 10 to 15 years, Satya and Mark are two of the ones that have had the most influence. And both of them are values-based leaders. I mean, they're deeply, deeply committed to their values. And so that's where the form of philosophical discussion starts saying, okay. And now that we have AI coming in, by the way, and it is AI conscious,
yes,
well, that's another sort of metaphysical. So there's a bunch of parts of the framework so what I'm doing now is I write a business blog and a philosophical blog. I try to write one a week, and they all end up on LinkedIn.
There you go. So you're saying, just so I connect the dots. Yeah. So you're saying that you didn't market the book as a business book, but given the central growing issue of ethics in business, ethics in AI, ethics in fill in the blank, that it could have been positioned more in that space. Well, there you go. There's something for you to do.
I needed a marketing consultant. People thought I was one, and clearly I wasn't.
I love it. I have to say, when I saw that you had written that book and read just a little bit about it, I thought, now that's the book that I'm interested in. I love Zone to Win, as I'm a framework person myself. But this is the book that I will buy and read. And it sounds like
fun. I hope you enjoy it. It means a lot to me. It's probably, for me, it's obviously, it's a very, very important book. So, yeah.
So where do you go from here, Jeff? You've seem to have kind of done it all. What are you thinking?
People say, well, do you still have to work? I mean, and my financial advisor would say no, but it's like, well, and I kind of talk a little bit about this in the Infinite Staircase, saying, look, so the last chapter of that book is called Being Mortal. And actually, it was a riff on a book that the guy named Atul Gawande wrote a book called Being Mortal. And it was about how his dad was in hospice and how you could actually work with being mortal. If you took being mortal more seriously earlier, you could make that end of life thing a lot more productive and not so anxious and whatever. But I took the idea and went even further and said, people in my stage of life right now, we're kind of at the top of our powers. I mean, I have more access now than I've ever had in my whole career. And it's like, why would you get off the field? I mean, why would you do that? I mean, so I think as long as I can have impact, I'm going to do this. And at some point, when I'm drooling off of the thing and you think, oh, Mr. Moore, don't go on video anymore, probably at that point I should stop. But not yet.
Well, I think that it's access, and it's also there's just a self-confidence of being right or wrong or anything that sits in between. It's really much less of the motivator, right? And the dialogue is more of a draw.
You have the same gift. I think consultants like us have to have pattern recognition. And the more experience you have, it's like Bobby Fischer playing chess.
Yeah.
He looks at a chessboard and he goes, oh, well, but. Yeah, and you and I will walk into a situation because you've been in so many other situations.
Right.
You go, oh, yeah, well, but. And people are going, oh, in the world. And it's like, well, not first rodeo.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Experience comes brings us a lot, right? It brings us a lot. And I think that this idea, as you're saying, to me, it's quite interesting that, it really brings us, a skill set around pattern recognition.
Yeah.
It's kind of tremendous in terms of the more data that you have to create those patterns.
The purpose of the framework is actually to transfer as much of that capability to your client as you can.
That's right.
Because you don't want to have a client say, well, I did it because Mimi said so. You want to have a client say, I did it because I looked at the business through the lens of her framework. And as a result, I conclude, and by the way, I'd like to discuss it with you because you might conclude differently. But in the basis of this point of view, it looks like we should take this other action, which we had not done before. So the framework, as opposed to, like the McKinsey Bain BCG model of we're going to create a deck and we're going to explain everything to you and we're going to be the smartest people in the room. Often they are, by the way. But the problem is it doesn't get adopted. It doesn't transition. If you give the client a framework, it's incomplete. The framework is not the execution plan.
By design.
They still have to create the
design.
execution.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. It's the whole, fish or fishing idea,
exactly.
Something I can walk away with and apply. And you know what? Make it your own. There's also the make it your own because your context is going to change my framework and it should, right? And it should. Yeah. So, Jeff, I usually ask my guests for any, final words of wisdom. You've given me so many. You could just say, look, I'm done. But if there's anything else you wanted to get on the table, I welcome it.
I think it's for you and me, but it's also, I think, for the CEO, the C-suite leaders. It's not about you. If you want to be successful, you just can't make it about you. You just can't. You have to make it about what you're in service to. And if as soon as you do that, you align yourself and you also recruit the rest of the world. The rest of the world may or may not be interested in helping you. But there's a whole bunch of people in the world that will be on whatever mission you're on. There'll be other people in the world that want to be on that mission.
Yeah.
And they will align with you, and your power is a function of that alignment with others. So that's what I would wish for people.
Very good. Well, we'll make that our closing thought here, Jeff. And I want to tell you how much I totally enjoyed this. Your breadth and range is so impressive. I love it.
Well,
and I hope maybe you'll come back again and let me know what you've been up to. I have a feeling it will be something. I don't know what, but something.
I hope I won't be prosecuted for it. Yes.
That's right. That's right. So thank you again for your time. And we'll make sure that we get information out in terms of where people can find the books, Ken, when we, get the podcast published, because I'm sure we'll have some folks interested in learning a little bit more. So until next time, we'll see you and good fortune and have a great...
Aloha.
Aloha. That's right. Exactly. All right. See you soon.
Bye.